What happens when the world's most dangerous waterway becomes a battlefield, and the very trap meant to stop a superpower starts hurting the side that built it? And what if the fight for Hormuz is no longer just about ships and missiles, but about who controls the flow of the global economy itself? Before we go deeper, take 2 seconds to support the channel in your own powerful way. Hit like, tap subscribe, and share this video with one friend who loves serious world affairs. The Strait of Hormuz has always been one of the most sensitive places on Earth. It is narrow, tense, and packed with strategic importance. Every day, a huge share of the world's oil and energy supply moves through this small stretch of water. If Hormuz stays open, markets breathe. If Hormuz closes, panic spreads from one continent to another. That is why every movement in these waters matters. Every warning matters. Every ship matters. Now, according to the scenario we are looking at today, the United States has made a major move to reopen and secure this critical route. 2 guided missile destroyers, the USS Frankie Peterson Jr. and the USS Michael Murphy, reportedly passed through Hormuz during a moment of extreme tension. But these warships were not just sailing for show. They represented something bigger. They were a signal, a statement, a message that Washington may be ready to do far more than simply watch the crisis grow. Behind these destroyers, there's another layer to the story, and this layer may be even more important. The United States is said to be preparing mine-clearing operations with advanced systems, including underwater drones and unmanned vehicles designed to detect and neutralize naval mines. That detail changes everything. Because when a country sends not just warships, but also tools to physically open a blocked sea route, it means the mission is no longer symbolic. It becomes operational, and that is where the danger starts to rise fast. As these American ships entered the strait, Iranian Revolutionary Guard naval units reportedly tracked them closely. There were warnings over the radio. There were signs of direct challenge. There were claims and counterclaims. One side said the passage was legal and in line with international rules. The other side pushed a message of defiance and said future responses could be harsher. At the center of all this was a narrow corridor of water where one wrong move could trigger a much larger conflict. But the biggest twist in this story may not be the passage of the destroyers. It may be the fact that the mines themselves have become a problem for Iran too. That is what makes this situation so brutal and so ironic. The idea behind laying mines in or around Hormuz is simple in theory. You create fear. You slow shipping. You increase pressure on global markets. You raise the cost of war for your enemy. And you remind the world that this strait cannot be ignored. But theory is one thing and reality is another. Once mines are placed quickly, irregularly, and under pressure, control can disappear very fast. Strong currents can move them. Chaos can scatter them. Bad coordination can turn a planned barrier into a drifting threat that harms everyone. If that is what has happened here, then the trap has started to backfire. Instead of creating a clean and controlled pressure point, the mine threat may have become a wild hazard floating through one of the most important shipping lanes on Earth. Contact mines, magnetic mines, acoustic mines, and drifting explosives do not care who is in control politically. They do not check flags. They do not wait for a speech. They do not care whether the next ship is American, Iranian, commercial, Asian, or European. Once the water becomes unstable, every actor in the region faces risk. And this is where the U.S. move begins to look cold, calculated, and ruthless in strategic terms. By sending powerful destroyers through the strait and following with mine-clearing systems, Washington appears to be doing 2 things at once. First, it is testing whether passage is still possible under pressure. Second, it is preparing the ground for a new reality in which the United States, not Iran, defines what safe movement in Hormuz looks like. That is a massive shift. The destroyers involved are not ordinary ships. Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers are floating combat networks. They carry advanced radar, missile defense systems, and the ability to track multiple threats over large distances. If they were chosen for this mission, it likely was not by accident. They are built to survive in contested environments. They are built to deter. And if needed, they are built to fight their way through danger. Their passage also sends another message to commercial shipping. If the U.S. Navy can move through, then a protected corridor may be possible. That matters because world trade does not need perfect safety to resume. It needs enough confidence. Tanker companies, insurers, and energy markets all react to risk, not just headlines. Once a few large ships cross successfully, the entire psychological picture can begin to change. That may be why even a limited opening in Hormuz could have an outsized impact on global markets. The world does not need the strait to feel calm. It just needs proof that the strait is not completely lost. Still, the real work is not on the surface. It is below. The most important phase ahead may involve autonomous underwater systems, mine warfare teams, sonar mapping, and a slow effort to create a narrow but reliable safe lane. This will not be quick. It will not be clean, and it will not be risk-free. Mines in shallow or busy waters are a nightmare. Mines that have drifted from their original positions are even worse. A single missed explosive can destroy a tanker, damage a warship, or trigger an international crisis overnight. That is why this mission, if it expands, could become one of the most delicate military engineering efforts in the region in years. It is not just about force. It is about precision. It is about patience. It is about turning uncertainty into a controlled corridor, meter by meter. And yet, while this technical work may unfold beneath the sea, the political and military drama above the water is moving in another direction. Reports linked to this crisis suggest that after failed talks and growing frustration, Washington may be considering something even tougher than escorting ships or clearing mines. The idea being discussed is a form of U.S.-controlled blockade or enforced maritime control around Hormuz. If that happens, the mission stops being only about restoring movement. It becomes about deciding movement. That is the real shock hidden inside this story. Think about what that means. If the U.S. Navy moves from opening a safe lane to controlling the entrances and exits of the strait, then Iran's influence over one of its most important strategic pressure points would be sharply reduced. Tehran has long treated Hormuz as a powerful card in any wider confrontation. But if another navy effectively takes charge of who passes, who is inspected, and who is blocked, then that card loses value very fast. And that is why this could feel so brutal from Iran's point of view. The very crisis built to raise American costs might instead invite a stronger American naval presence, wider international support, and a practical challenge to Iranian control of regional sea traffic. In other words, the trap becomes the excuse for a more permanent countermove. Now let's step back and ask the bigger question: why does the world care so much about this one stretch of water? The answer is energy. Around 1/5 of the world's oil trade moves through Hormuz. That number alone explains why every threat in this area causes fear in stock markets, shipping offices, insurance desks, and government war rooms. When Hormuz is threatened, the shock is not local. It hits Europe, it hits Asia, it hits fuel prices, production costs, and inflation expectations across the global economy. Countries like China, Japan, South Korea, and India depend heavily on energy flows linked to this route. Europe too remains vulnerable, especially when other energy systems are already under strain. This means a crisis in Hormuz is never only about Iran and the United States. It immediately becomes a global issue. If ships stop moving, factories slow down, refineries face pressure, insurance premiums rise, shipping companies hesitate, alternative routes become overloaded or far more expensive. And ordinary people, far away from the Gulf, begin to feel the impact in fuel bills, transport costs, and food prices. That is why even the rumor of a closure can move markets. Now imagine what happens when the threat is not just rumor, but a real field of naval mines, military warnings, failed diplomacy, and the movement of destroyers. This is why the U.S. move matters. It is not simply military theater. It is an attempt, or at least a signal, that Washington will not allow this choke point to stay locked for long. If you're still with me, show some love in a different way this time. Drop a like, hit subscribe, and share this video so more people can understand what is really at stake in Hormuz. Of course, that does not mean success is guaranteed. Far from it. The Persian Gulf is a dangerous operating environment even in calmer times. In a crisis, it becomes one of the hardest places on Earth for large warships to operate safely. The waters are narrow, the coastline is close, missile launch sites, drones, and fast attack boats can all become part of the threat picture. A powerful navy still faces hard limits when geography favors the defender. This is exactly where Iran's asymmetric doctrine becomes important. For years, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has developed methods designed to pressure stronger conventional forces. Instead of matching major navies ship for ship, it focuses on swarming tactics, drones, and shore-based missiles. The logic is simple. If you cannot dominate openly, you make the battlefield too costly and unpredictable. And in Hormuz, that strategy can be especially threatening. At some points, the navigable corridor is extremely narrow. Reaction time in such an environment can shrink to seconds. A missile launch from shore, a fast boat attack, a drone strike, or a sudden mine incident could force rapid decisions with global consequences. If even one major American warship were badly damaged in such a setting, the political pressure for escalation would explode. So while Washington may have superior firepower, Iran still has tools that can create real danger. That balance is what makes the crisis so unstable. But here is where the backfire argument becomes stronger. Iran's mine strategy may create pain for others, but it also hits Iran itself. Iranian oil exports depend on the same region. Iranian economic stability depends on the same strategic geography. And the longer Hormuz remains dangerous, the more the entire world begins looking for alternatives. That weakens the long-term value of the threat Iran uses. So if Tehran turns Hormuz into a weapon for too long, it may slowly destroy the usefulness of that weapon. That is the boomerang effect. And that effect may already be underway. Energy buyers start adjusting, shipping patterns begin to change, insurance structures are rewritten, governments accelerate alternative route planning, strategic reserves become more important. Investments in new pipelines, new suppliers, and new energy systems get fresh urgency. In the short term, that transition is expensive. In the long term, it can reduce dependence on the strait, and if that happens, Iran's leverage declines. This is why the current crisis may be bigger than a temporary naval showdown. It may be a turning point in how the world thinks about maritime energy security. There's another layer too, and this one is rarely discussed honestly enough. Whenever a major choke point becomes unstable, someone else usually profits. In this scenario, Russia stands out. As prices rise and markets panic, countries under pressure may become more flexible in where they buy energy. Sanctions enforcement can weaken under stress. The higher the price shock, the more room major exporters have. Russia, which has already spent years adapting its export structure, could gain from exactly this kind of disruption. Higher prices and supply fear can give Moscow more revenue and more room to exploit the moment. But the advantage may not stop with oil prices. If the Middle East route looks less secure, alternative logistics visions become more attractive. Northern shipping discussions and Arctic transit gain fresh relevance. A crisis in Hormuz does not create a new global map overnight, but it can speed up strategic thinking. That is why this situation reaches far beyond the Gulf. It touches the war in Ukraine indirectly, it touches Asian industrial planning, it touches Europe's energy future, it touches NATO politics. It even touches the military calculations of powers watching from a distance, including Russia and China. Both study how the United States stretches its power across multiple theaters at once. From that angle, the crisis becomes a strategic test of American capacity. The big question is whether Washington can secure a vital sea lane and deter Iran simultaneously. Those questions go to the heart of American power. If the U.S. manages to open even a limited corridor, escort shipping, and reduce panic without taking major losses, then it can claim a serious strategic win. It would show that Iran can create disruption but not permanent control. It would show that the global system still has a military protector willing to act. But if the operation stalls, if mines keep drifting, or if American assets suffer a major hit, then the message changes completely. Then the crisis becomes proof that asymmetric warfare can hold the economy hostage. That is why every next step matters so much. What might those next steps look like? Most likely, the first phase would focus on identifying and clearing a minimum safe lane. Not the whole strait at once, just enough space for guided movement. Enough for escorted convoys. Enough to prove that controlled passage is still possible. That alone could restore part of the flow. After that, the US and any partners involved would likely try to scale security outward. More surveillance, more maritime patrol aircraft, more electronic monitoring, more rules for vessel movement. A pattern of controlled transit could then slowly replace raw uncertainty. But if Iran resists aggressively, then enforcement becomes much harsher. That is where blockade language becomes real. Ships could be stopped, searched, or denied movement. The strait could become a zone of naval management under overwhelming force. And if an international coalition joins in, the pressure on Iran grows even more. Some European states may hesitate while active war risks remain high. But if energy damage spreads, political hesitation can fade quickly. Mine countermeasure ships and surveillance support could join the effort. The mission would be framed not as war, but as protection of global trade. That framing is important. The side that convinces the world it is protecting commerce and stabilizing energy gains a narrative advantage. The side seen as creating drifting chaos risks diplomatic isolation. Perception matters as much as missiles, and right now perception may be turning against Tehran. A minefield that cannot be controlled is not a symbol of strength. It starts to look like recklessness. A threat that hits neutral shipping invites foreign naval management. At some point, it begins to project a loss of control. That is why people say the trap backfired. The move to make the strait ungovernable may end up justifying stronger outside control. Still, none of this means the danger is over. The road ahead is full of lethal possibilities. A drifting mine could strike unexpectedly. A nervous commander could misread a signal. A tanker incident could send oil prices flying. A warship confrontation could redraw limits of escalation. The line between controlled pressure and uncontrolled disaster is painfully thin. That is what makes Hormuz so terrifying. Before the final part, back this channel by liking the video. It is a place where strategy, pride, energy, fear, and military power collide in a very small space. When those forces meet in one corridor, the room for mistakes becomes dangerously small. Now let's talk about the economic shock in a human way. More expensive shipping means more expensive fuel. Higher transport costs lead to higher food prices and manufacturing costs. This pain travels fast. For developing countries relying on imported energy, the blow can be brutal. Public anger can rise quickly. For industries needing steady supply, uncertainty itself is destructive. Companies cut, delay, or relocate. The longer Hormuz stays unstable, the more the world economy bleeds in ways headlines cannot capture. And ironically, Iran bleeds too. Tehran wants leverage, but disruption destroys the value of that leverage. If the strait becomes too dangerous, everyone starts building around it, and the old threat loses power. In that sense, the mine strategy may carry the seed of its own defeat. Meanwhile, Washington understands something. It only needs to make Hormuz usable enough to break the image of total Iranian dominance. Once that image cracks, the balance shifts. The passage of those destroyers matters symbolically. It says the risk is not absolute, and American planners believe there is still room to act. Once underwater drones and sonar enter, the operation becomes a campaign to redefine control itself. Observers are watching because if the U.S. succeeds, it could mark a new security model in the Gulf. Iran might find that its tool of fear created the conditions for a deeper foreign military footprint. If that happens, the strategic loss for Tehran will be much bigger than any temporary pressure created. Hormuz is now a test point of American naval resolve and Iranian asymmetric strategy. It tests whether the international system can keep an artery open when a regional power weaponizes chaos. The U.S. is responding with force, technology, and timing, building a layered set of options. Iran retains serious capacity to threaten and escalate. No one should underestimate that reality. But power is about the ability to shape what comes next. Washington is trying for a strategic reset. That is the heart of the backfire. Iran wanted fear, but may get permanent foreign patrols instead. Iran wanted to show Hormuz could be closed, but may show why others will keep it open without permission. This episode may be remembered as a costly miscalculation that invited a much stronger answer. The battle is about control of trade, fear, narrative, and escalation. Consequences are hard to manage. Tiny places carry massive consequences. A drifting mind can change strategies and test great powers. What the U.S. just did in Hormuz may be the most important strategic move in recent history. Do you think the U.S. can secure Hormuz without a larger war, or is the risk too high? Write your view in the comments below, because every move could change the global balance.